Hello, everyone, and welcome. I want to welcome you to our webinar today discussing the strategic value of audits and connecting audits with GRC. We expect this webinar to last about 45 or 50 minutes. We hope to leave about 10 minutes in the end for any questions you guys might have. So yeah, let's just jump in. Let me introduce myself. My name is Craig Unger, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hyperproof. Hyperproof is one of the leading modern GRC systems, a new product that's been introduced in the last few years. We're serving organizations of all sizes with Hyperproof, from hundreds to hundreds of thousands, and really across all verticals as well. A very broad customer base. Today, I'm very happy to introduce kind of my partner in crime, who's with us, Rick Scarfino, who's the National Practice Leader for Third-Party Attestation at BDO, to discuss this important topic. And Rick, welcome first. And would you like to introduce yourself and say a few words about BDO?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Craig, and thank you all for joining us today. BDO is the fifth largest accounting firm globally, which positions us well to serve the middle market and Fortune 500 companies alike. It's a little bit painful to think about, but this will be my 25th year in the industry. As you mentioned, Craig, as the practice leader for our third-party attestation group, I get to work with some of the best compliance auditors in the business, and I oversee the service delivery of most of our cyber and data protection compliance frameworks. Some of those they're obviously embedded in the Hyperproof tool. So some of the likely frameworks like SOC, ISO, HITRUST, and the like. And with that, I'll kick it back to you, Craig, so we can get started.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Thanks very much, and welcome again. We're going to have some fun with the format today because we know that on this webinar, we've got folks who are quite familiar with Hyperproof, but maybe not as familiar with BDO, and the opposite. Folks who are really familiar with BDO don't know as much about Hyperproof. So the way we're going to handle this today, everyone, is we're just going to shoot some questions at each other and try to keep it pretty casual. If you hear anything that isn't clear or you need further clarification, definitely jot down a question, and we'll have some of the other hosts provide us with that question at the end. So I'm going to set the stage for the rest of the discussion here by asking you, Rick, what exactly are we announcing around the BDO and Hyperproof relationship? And can you describe that and how it would be important or helpful to your clients at BDO?
Yeah, happy to, Craig. As you know, we formalized our strategic alliance with Hyperproof in the latter half of 2024. And this alliance really allows us to bring a market-leading GRC solution to the table as our clients navigate the demands of seems to be an ever-expanding compliance landscape. Now, we had a bit of a soft rollout last year as our professionals learned the Hyperproof tool, gathered feedback on how to integrate it into our audit work streams. And now that we're past a vast majority of our client year-end reporting deadlines, we felt like this was an optimal time to have a larger rollout, especially as the clients prepare for their 2025 audit cycles. Now, you asked, why is the relationship important to BDO and our clients? The answer to that is really rooted in our core purpose at BDO, which is helping people thrive every day. When we assessed the compliance landscape and where it was heading, it is very clear to us that we would need a dynamic GRC solution in our toolbox as we serve clients if we're really going to truly be able to deliver on our promise to our clients going into the future. So, we studied the top GRC offerings in the market, and Craig, as you know, we ran you and your team through the ringer on our due diligence process. But it was really important for us to know that your tool could not only perform now, but it was positioned well to evolve with the changing landscape. And beyond just the performance of the tool itself, it was equally important to me and our business that our GRC business partner shared the same core values as an organization, and they were willing to be flexible enough to offer solutions to our clients in a way that really meets them where they're at on their GRC journey. So to that end, I'm excited that together we can offer solutions to our clients no matter where they are on the spectrum of their GRC journey. We for those clients that are in the early stages of adopting a tool, um, we can use the Hyperproof platform to just get them the external audit module of the GRC package, which essentially is a GRC light tool in and of itself with very little investment to them. That really helps them set a foundation for future to build on. And honestly, we like that option so much that we're looking heavily at the external audit module of your tool as maybe a wholesale replacement for our global portal. Um, for our clients that are on the far other end of the spectrum, they have a very mature GRC process and tools. It's extremely nice to know that they can also contract through you for your full GRC solution with all the bells and whistles, custom integrations, and the like. But really, at the end of the day, most of our clients are going to fall somewhere in the middle. And I really value that our relationship allows us to sort of flex up and down again to really meet the client where they're at. So that's a little bit of an overview of why our alliance is important to me and to BDO and our customers. So I'll pitch the same question back to you, Craig. Do you want to give us some color as to why our relationship is key for you and your customers?
Yeah, I'd love to. And first, I just want to respond to one of the things you said there, Rick, which really resonated, which was no matter where they are in their journey. Because I think, some level of standardization of a process and a little bit of a kind of treasure map to know where to go next is so crucial. And historically, it's been difficult to find out that information from your trusted advisors and assessors, whether that's BDO, in this case, certainly it's BDO. But instead, people go to others in the industry, or if you're a CISO, maybe you're talking to other CISOs, and it's almost been like a best kept secret as to what the best way to do this is. But with what you described, I think we can kind of bring a lot of visibility, to the market, and help our joint clients just set their expectations better. Now, as far as for us, there's one huge piece that I want to say up front of why I'm really excited for what this relationship does for our customers. And that's around trust and the BDO name. And I just want to talk about that first because, BDO has been around a long time. It's a scaled organization. We are still in that kind of late startup mode. We're 6.5 years old or so. And, we brought some new modern plans, experiences, design points into this kind of compliance GRC space. But, it's such an important process for organizations to make sure that they can make their clients and their partners feel trusted, that the idea that we can partner with an organization with BDO's long history and background and deep trust in the organization, it automatically helps our customers feel better about making the choice on Hyperproof. So that I would say sets the stage for really the whole show. But in terms of, if you look at it in terms of what our customers use Hyperproof for, then you get to a lot more in the way of specifics, because our customers, one of the big process changes that we've brought into the GRC and the compliance industry is what we call compliance operations, ComOps for short. And it's really all about taking some of the work and moving it up forward in the year. We all know the audit is the Super Bowl. You pass that audit, and it's the kind of the final and important look. But why should all the work be done right before? We really wanted to move it up in time, and we wanted to let people kind of choose the way they wanted to represent their security stance throughout the whole course of the year, because that's really what compliance is. It's your security stance. So when our customers use Hyperproof to represent and automate both their compliance and their security stance, they come to a certain point where it is time to engage in the audit. And from our perspective, it's very important to have a standardized workflow that helps you through the year in preparing for the audit, but also carries through to the audit. And maybe I can kind of also illustrate it with the counter example, which is when folks are working with firms that don't embrace the tools like a Hyperproof, what happens is when they get to the audit, they've got to do something totally different than they've been doing all year. A lot of times that looks like uploading a lot of files to, let's say, SharePoint or something like that, and it just doesn't have continuity with their processes. So the biggest thing that I'm really excited about is the continuity and standardization of the process that happens from the moment you start compliance all the way to, preparing and then finishing an audit successfully, and then even that iterative approach where you get better the next time. And and a lot of that is through the eyes of the auditor, the BDO team. So if we're here to help our customers get better, and BDO has such a wonderful opinionated view of how to do that after the audit, we've got to make sure that we're working together super closely. And then the final thing I'll say is just the expertise in-house in BDO allows us to learn from some of the best practitioners out there in the industry. And I think that's crucial. So, we've had and will continue to have very interesting discussions around how to mature the overall audit process. What is the next level in sampling? How might AI or ML change some of that? What should the workflow look like? How do you set expectations between the audit firm and the auditor and then the client? And we now have a great, partner, not in crime, but in improvement, to be able to kind of work on those and make the overall process better. So those are the reasons we're excited. And just for anybody, who's wondering, well, there's some folks who are more familiar with BDO or more familiar with Hyperproof. One facet of the relationship is that it really doesn't matter where the customer starts. They can start as a BDO customer who, frankly, has never heard of Hyperproof until this particular webinar was advertised, or a Hyperproof customer who may be deciding, well, hey, what's the best auditor that I can pick that who will work closely with Hyperproof? And I think there's a very, very small number, with BDO being right there, who work very closely with Hyperproof. And so, I think whether you start with Hyperproof or you start with the BDO relationship, we can kind of satisfy you, serve you, and get you to a place of efficiency.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you made reference to the audit being the Super Bowl, a timely reference, and I might have you start to do our recruiting. I don't know if auditors coming into the profession view the audit as we're going to the Super Bowl with our clients. So that's
just
great.
Take out an ad. Just take out an ad.
That's right. But I mean, you're hitting it on the nose, right? The end of the audit shouldn't be a surprise. If we're doing all the right things throughout the year, we like to say, in the industry, we've given you all the answers to the test. Like this really shouldn't be a surprise. So if you're doing all the right things leading up to the audit, it should be a non-event. That's what we'd all love.
Agree.
So anyway, so we're throwing out the term GRC in the title and as we're talking, but you and I both know that the GRC is changing fast. So can you define modern GRC for our audience and really set the stage for the rest of the discussion here?
Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks, Rick. I think, the GRC, when you talk about governance, you talk about risk, you talk about some of these processes that have been done for a long time, but they're done differently now. They're, obviously the environment is a lot more tech enabled, and that's both on the ability to collect data that's important, and also running algorithms, whether it's AI, ML, or just any other heuristics on the data. It gives you an opportunity to really look at the workload and kind of rebuild it from the ground up. So probably the best way to define what a modern GRC would probably be to talk about what are some of the elements that it includes. And so I'll kind of list off a handful of them. I mean, certainly it's still very oriented around what I'll call operational compliance, which is setting out those processes and controls that you need to be compliant with to represent your security stance in the right way and to prepare you for the audit. I'd say that's still at the center of it, although you'd argue done a little bit in a different way, where very large organizations can now standardize and publish controls, and they can hold, the peer parts of their organizations a little bit better, and make them a little bit more accountable towards those standardizations. Certainly, there's a lot more in the way of automations and testing. There'll be some in the industry that you'll hear say it's all about, putting compliance on, autopilot. It's all about automating. And we believe heavily in automation as a major part of it, but we're not ready to say it's all about automating, because in truth, if you look at what really presents the biggest risk to organizations of any size, it's really about the people, and it's about the social engineering that happens there. So we now have included a lot more capability around how you involve people in the compliance process. And I think that's a big change from what GRC used to be. GRC used to feel like it's like a star chamber of people who are meeting behind closed doors, and they might come out with a pronouncement asking the business to do something different or what have you. But it certainly didn't feel like it was a collaborative experience, and one that was highly enabled by software. So I think that's a couple comments on compliance still being at the center of it, but done in a different way. And a couple other things I'll mention is risk. Risk is definitely playing an increasingly important role in GRC and in overall security programs at organizations for a number of reasons. One is there's so much growth in compliance, and there's just more resourcing that has to be put toward it. And in order to really justify that, a higher level understanding of what the corporate risks that are being addressed are, almost as a view of what the ROI is of doing compliance, is becoming more popular. People want to understand, why are we doing this? What risk does it abate? How can I understand that? And there's even an increasing push, which I'd say is less than a year old, to start to think of risk and value in the same thought. How could I be generating value, not just cost center, but value for the organization by addressing my risk? So the tie-in between risk and compliance, the first two things that we've spoken about, very, very important. We're very proud of how we've done that at Hyperproof, where we connect strategic risk with operational compliance, and one can affect the other. And you get almost like a recalculation based upon how your compliance changes to what your risks might be. And that's really, we think, the way of the future. A couple other things too. Most of the breaches that happen, or let's say the likelihood of getting hit by a third-party breach, is exceeding the likelihood of a breach in your own systems. And what I mean by third-party breach is in your supply chain, right? So now, like, one partner has an issue, and that partner is a big company. It serves 10,000 others, and so all of a sudden, the 10,000 companies now have had effectively like a third-party breach that's happened. So the idea of a GRC being a key tool in understanding how your partners in your supply chain are set up to deal with risks, to prevent those breaches and risks from coming true, and making sure that they do more than just checkbox it. I think that's an important part of GRC. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is very new. Only as of about 2 weeks ago in the EU, a new framework called DORA has went into force. And DORA is the Digital Operations and Resiliency Act. And this opens up what I believe will be a new leg of GRC, which is around resiliency. And you can think of resiliency as just, business continuity, tabletop exercises and simulations that help you plan for, what might go wrong. And then all of the processes that you need to have in place to notify, right, the people when things go wrong. That's all part of resiliency. And I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see that carried through from the EU into the US, and it's going to become a bit more of a card-carrying part of GRC. So those are some of the major pieces you're going to look for in a new GRC. And of course, who can answer any question today without mentioning AI, right? There's going to have to be some view of what the best way is to adopt AI safely and be able to really analyze what's going on at scale to bring efficiency and advantage to everything that we spoke about. And that's roughly how we think about how we're developing the Hyperproof product. And I'm also made to think about, you said, Rick, that we're throwing around GRC, right? As if we all know what it is. And so we're trying to define some of what GRC is. But I also think we take a lot for granted in the regulatory environment itself, right? It's hard for any one organization to track it all. And you find yourself quickly asking experts about where things are going and what the future is going to look like. So I'm gonna pose that to my expert here, Rick, who really works across tons of different frameworks now and sees them emerging pretty early, and just ask you the question of, where do you think that part of the industry is going?
Sure. I mean, nobody wants to hear this, but the truth of the matter is that, and you just touched on one example. Governments and regulatory bodies are going to continue to introduce new regulations, and existing regulations are going to continue to expand to become more stringent. It's pretty wild to think that we're almost 10 years since the enactment of GDPR, and we've all seen a flurry of compliance frameworks hit the market since, and there's really no clear indication that we would expect that to slow down. Now, while as we see these new frameworks roll out and the current frameworks evolve to meet a lot of the challenges you just mentioned, I think we can anticipate an increased focus on at least four areas, and you touched on some on your last response. But the first is accountability, whether through heavier penalties or increased breach disclosures or some combination of thereof. We're seeing a lot more teeth when it comes to accountability. And we're even seeing that accountability dial up in frameworks outside of those that we're more commonly aware, deal with, the more cyber frameworks. We're seeing it pop up in the SEC's new rules on cyber risk management and incident disclosure. So now public filers will need to make required disclosures around incidents in far greater detail than they ever required that they were required to in the past. And I think that underpins the importance of incident management, which is the second area that I think we'll see increased focus in. You know, incidents, as you mentioned, are almost becoming inevitable, and it's imperative for third-party service providers to demonstrate their organization is positioned to minimize the impact to operations and to customers through robust detection, containment, remediation, and recovery mechanisms that can really keep pace with that changing threat landscape. And incident management really plays into what you were just discussing on resiliency. The resiliency of your business is not only critical to sort of maintain compliance with a lot of these frameworks, but it's also critical to maintaining customer trust and loyalty. So much of our world is outsourced to third-party providers at this point, and at the same time, there's very little tolerance for unplanned downtime, operational disruptions. And so the companies that can manage this risk well and be on point with resiliency will create a competitive advantage for themselves in the marketplace. And then the last area that I think we'll see an uptick in focus on within the regulatory environment and any of these new frameworks is vendor risk management. You really can't effectively manage resiliency or incident management, for that matter, without having a robust vendor risk management process in place. So those that are successful in managing these key vendors will ultimately be successful when it comes to managing some of those other critical components.
And, I just want to stress, the underpinning of a lot of what you said around the accountability, how fast moving things have become, and really the responsibility of the most senior people in the organization. And you were talking about the SEC final rule that was passed in July of 23. The most senior people in the organization, from my perspective, having tracked it over the last, 10 plus years at least, that's been ratcheting up like every couple of years. There was a time where you did not have to report legally a breach on your 10K, but people did, but you didn't really have to. And then the government realized, hey, we like the companies that actually report on it. Let's make it a rule that you have to report on the breaches. And then companies weren't getting fined for having breaches even at that point. They were getting fined if they didn't act on the breaches in a timely way. That was like the next level of slowly ratcheting up the pressure. And then the one you're speaking about, as I think it's the biggest, because it's the biggest additional responsibility that organizations have had to take up in the last 10 years, because everything around the breaches was very operational, like solve the breach, document it, make sure you get to your customers in time and all that. But what was asked, or more than asked, what's gone into law in 23 with this SEC final rule was all about generally taking responsibility for understanding your environments. And the way I look at that is like an attack against plausible deniability on the part of the most senior execs. There was a lot of discussion there around ensuring that you have somebody with cyber on your board, and you're just not going to be able to say that I gave that over to my CISO or my whomever, right? And so I think that is like a background to this whole industry of like who really is taking the responsibility. And I know it's also been a very active topic among CISOs who say, okay, we're being hired for this role, but what is the right level of responsibility for us to take? And so I think that that kind of accountability piece is going to drive as much change as anything else in the next few years.
Right. You mentioned Dora, and I think that's a good example that we can continue to anticipate additional regional frameworks to pop up, globally, and that's just going to continue to put pressure on our clients that operate in multiple countries. But one of the positive trends we have seen on the regulatory front is a little bit of an increase in demand and desire to harmonize these new frameworks with existing globally accepted frameworks. So I'm hoping that trend continues, and we see more collaboration across these regulating bodies to sort of help us all from going crazy. But maybe that's just a wish. I don't know. Maybe
No,
we'll
I've seen it.
see
I
how it
mean,
plays out.
there's organizations like even the CSA is starting to get a committee together to try to harmonize some of the controls, et cetera, because they see that that's the only way you can really be compliant and in turn be as secure as you want. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a race among different standards teams to do just that, Rick.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that you may be thinking of this in terms of your business, but it's worth noting that your customers are experiencing the same increase in regulatory challenges, and that will continue to drive them to ask you to adopt new compliance frameworks to help meet their compliance needs. So, understanding your customer concentrations in certain industries and certain geographies, and the regulatory landscape of those industries and geographies is going to be just as important as understanding your own. And honestly, if managed proactively, compliance in these newer frameworks can be a bit of a growth enabler for a business. And that's why I personally love the Jumpstart feature that's embedded in the Hyperproof tool. And so, Craig, I think that might be a good, spot to transition to the next topic of, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about how Hyperproof can help individuals deal with these new regulatory challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rick. You never have to ask me twice for me to pitch my product, so happy to do it. But I'll try to keep it controlled and hit just a few points. So, I'll go back to why we started the company. We started the company to make it easier to deal with compliance in the environment we're talking about, where there's a growing set of it. We took a particular position on this to say, look, we don't necessarily have to. Well, we don't have to be at an organization's first compliance experience because there's some remediality to that, but also usually the problems start to really multiply when the organization has to scale, and that could be into multiple regions like you were talking about, Rick, or different verticals or what have you. And so when we architected the product, we really focused a lot on how we can make your compliance program as a Hyperproof customer way more efficient as you grow. Okay, so and though that's like evidenced in the product in a couple ways, one of which you touched on, Rick. But the first way is that we try to have the best coverage of all compliance frameworks in the industry. So we do what you might think of as horizon scanning to look around. We use tools to do it. We use our own internal AI tools as well to look around and figure out, well, what's actually coming up as either an all new framework or a new revision of a framework. And that's led us to a place where we have more than 120 frameworks in the product. So that's all your ISOs, NIST. Basically, it's all the tech and cyber frameworks you'd expect. Then you were talking about GDPR, Rick. We've got that, and kind of all of the each of the states seems to have imported their own privacy framework, which is a topic for another day. It does multiply out the work, but we have those frameworks in the product as well. And the whole approach is that when you move from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, the marginal cost goes down as you go. And that doesn't mean it's not more total cost, but the marginal cost goes down of adding the next framework, because we actually do all the searching through the work you did, and we leverage we leverage all the controls that you already have into the new framework. And we call that, that's crosswalking in the product. So I think that's been a great thing for organizations. They don't have to be big enterprises. They could be mid-market and just looking to prepare themselves, for scale. And to the other comment that you made, sometimes it's not just scale in the audits that we want to do, but it's just that we, as let's say a mid-market company, we're going to serve larger enterprises. We're going to sell to larger enterprises. Those enterprises are going to ask us about a broader range of frameworks, and we have to be able to show that we are compliant with that broader range. So I think that's like a core value proposition of Hyperproof. One of the challenges in the industry is when you don't, a new framework you don't know about, you haven't had exposure to it, and it's scary. You start to say, well, what do I have to do to make sure that, and what have I already done, right, to make sure that I could be compliant here? Well, Hyperproof has several features in the product, and more coming too, that allow organizations to deal more effectively with what I'll call novel content. And that's a broad range of new content that, maybe the organization wasn't exposed to before. New policies, a new framework they haven't, been exposed to before, new requirements, whether it be from standards bodies or their customers. And so the question is, when those come in, how can you make it much simpler for the organization to take the work they've already done? And whether it's through the crosswalking I talked about, or through novel AI capabilities that allow you to really understand some of the semantics behind this kind of new policy that you may have never been exposed to before, Hyperproof carries a specific responsibility of helping you make that simpler. And so you see that in our product around suggesting controls, and very soon we're going to be suggesting risks and other pieces. When it comes to lowering the workload, we really want to take a lot of the manual work out. And so Hyperproof focuses a lot on automating evidence collection. As I said before, it's not the whole game, but it's a part of it to make sure that you can get data straight from systems, like the AWSs in Azure, where you're running maybe your compute workloads, or your build systems to make sure that you're following SDLC. So let's say a GitHub or Jira or something like that, and many others. We have dozens and dozens of these things. So being able to automate the collection of the evidence and test it gives you a feeling that you're keeping your organization compliant every day. And of course, that means that you're going to be much more likely to pass the audit. So the evidence collection is a huge part. And then also getting the right people in the organization involved, because at the end of the day, with all the social engineering and all the kind of access to data that is specific to individuals who may have a credential for one system and somebody else has a credential for another system, you got to get them involved. You got to bring them in so that the part of your whole infrastructure that they own is also compliant. Nobody does that like Hyperproof. We have full set of tasking capabilities. You can deal with those tasks in Hyperproof, in other tools like a Jira or an Asana or a ServiceNow. We have full issue remediation to help you work through larger issues in your system. So it just makes it so that the org could really speak with one voice. And then the final thing that I'll call out would be the reporting, right? There's the work that gets done inside Hyperproof to make sure that you're really protected, compliant, and the audits themselves getting run. And then there's how everybody else in the organization thinks the compliance process is going, the optics, if you will, of the compliance process. And Hyperproof has some great dashboards and abilities to, project out the work that's being done to all the key decision makers in the organization to make sure that everybody's comfortable that the right work is being done to protect the org. So I could talk for hours. There's a lot of other capabilities I didn't hit on, but those are some of the things that we feel Hyperproof really carries responsibility for in order to help individuals deal with this challenge of more and more compliance. Things happening faster and faster, in the world out there, and it's a fun journey to be on, because at its heart, it's really a journey of innovation.
Yeah, Craig, you mentioned 120 compliance frameworks. It's a serious number. I haven't touched all 120. I have to admit, but I know they're in there. I've seen it. What I'd add to that is, on the off chance you don't have a framework in there, or the framework is so naturally like customizable by its nature that it doesn't make sense to live in the tool. There's like every demo I've been on, it's been like, we can get that in the tool if it makes sense to do that. And if not, there's a way to import it as a custom framework. Right. And so like, even if somehow you touched on something that's not part of the 120, there's a way to get that as part of the equation into the tool, which I think is just fantastic.
Hey, thanks, Rick. I appreciate you mentioning that. You're hired in hyperproof marketing. You
All
convinced
right.
me. I actually I ran the numbers the other day for a different purpose. It turns out about between 10 and 15% of the compliance frameworks that are done across all of Hyperproof's customers are custom frameworks. They're
Oh,
things that
wow.
are just for their organization. They could have even started from a standardized one, but it's been changed enough and re-uploaded. It's a custom framework helping with a very tough problem. Like, how would you do that? Otherwise, you'd probably have to do it in spreadsheets.
Sure.
Um, so we talked a little about the changes in the industry, a little bit how Hyperproof can help. Just a word from you, Rick, on how are some of your clients changing and shifting their expectations due to these challenges? So, being hit with more work or more geographies, those kinds of things. What are they expecting out of you? We've talked a little bit about how my product and Hyperproof can help.
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned earlier, the SEC's rules on cyber risk management is making all of this a board issue, a board level issue, I should say. So that this topic being on their radar, they're demanding more transparency into how risk and compliance is being managed throughout the organization. That ultimately trickles down to our world as well as part of the external audit component of all this. So that's a change in expectations. Um, the topics being on the board's radar isn't necessarily a bad thing when you consider it's starting to drive some increase in budget
Mm,
for GRC processes, teams, and systems. But I admittedly, I don't think the increase in budget is really keeping pace with what
proportional.
they need to stay ahead of the curve. And that's creating a little bit of a demand from our clients to help them close the gap. And what that looks like for us is they really want us to bring solutions to the table to help them reduce the time their control owners are spending on the external audit and ultimately help them reduce their overall audit fatigue. Um,
Makes sense.
yeah, another change in expectation has been around, they're really wanting more guidance on the changing compliance landscape, what gaps they might need to anticipate. And another common one is how do they apply more of a common control framework across their enterprise that they can leverage across the multiple compliance frameworks that they have to deal with. So that's been a change in expectations
Really interesting.
recently. And then finally, with the increase in the number of frameworks out there in the market, frankly, clients are expecting us to add those as services to our portfolios. So,
Mm,
you know, not only having the ability to conduct the actual audit, but to also do it in a unified manner across several frameworks and several geographies is becoming critical to meeting, client expectations in the future. So that's a little bit about how our client expectations are changing of us. And honestly, by and large, we view our relationship with Hyperproof as one of the key enablers to help us meet those expectations head on. And we
that's cool.
really are able to do so in a way that's mutually beneficial to both BDO and our clients.
I
So,
love it.
yeah.
Love
Switching gears a little bit, um, Craig, historically, it's been really time consuming to evaluate and roll out a new GRC. Um, can you describe how you've attacked this problem at Hyperproof, and how does how does your relationship with us help in this in any way?
Yeah, I'll hit this one fairly quickly. I'd say three things in terms of, and it's so true, Rick. I mean, there's been a lot of fear of, oh my God, I have to do GRC again. It's like a mini version of what was happening in the ERP industry years ago, where like, nobody wanted to touch it because it's kind of fragile. But I think the first thing that we did to make it easier is to say that you don't need to do a full platform rip and replace, right? You may be using another tool. You may be, another GRC. You may be using just spreadsheets, but whatever the case, you don't have to go on a 3-year journey to kind of arrive at a destination. We have some extremely valuable what we call power use cases that help you just drop in some of the benefits that we talked about here. So a good one would be the standardizing of the controls that we talked about. That is one of our power use cases. You can drop that in around existing tools and still perhaps use the other tools for some level of governance that maybe you're not doing in Hyperproof or what have you. So you can surround other systems with workloads that are much easier to get done and provide you a lot of value quickly. That's one thing. The second thing is for a company of our kind of age, we've over invested in a way in all the help that we give. So there's a lot of self-guided training and help, but then we also have an implementation team that sits down with our customers and asks them what they're trying to achieve really early on as part of the sales process, and then takes them on that journey. It could be, 4 to 6 weeks at the lower end. Maybe it takes 2 to 3 months at the higher end, but it's not a full-time, responsibility for you. You as a client of Hyperproof, maybe get on 6, 8, 10 hours with us during a number of weeks, and then you exit with like a system that's up and going with the right controls in there, the right frameworks, and we even get your first automations in there, and then we can hand over the keys for you to your first analytics as well. Then we hand over the keys for you to customize your tests and your automations and some of your analytics. So I just think that piece of it is important, along with the overall product support. Once you're implemented, you have access to product support, and there's that ride alongside you during your whole journey with Hyperproof. So they're always there to show you what's new or be able to direct you in the right place. That's the second thing. And then the newest thing that we're just starting, actually, starting this in the next month or two, is a professional services capability that spans across Hyperproof and our partners. So depending upon how deeply you want to go in customizing Hyperproof towards very specific business needs that you have, we'll either do it directly out of Hyperproof, or we can bring in partners that are, very skilled in implementing Hyperproof. One of the biggest partners, I don't know how much bigger you can get actually, that we have in that area is Accenture. So Accenture is an option, and they do a lot of customization, and they'll do a lot of integration between Hyperproof and other tools. So it's pretty quick to get up and going with some real value.
That's great.
Yeah. So okay. So why don't we finish this off? I know we're running out of time. With just one quick question. I'll ask you. I'm sure you're going to ask me this too, which is just because of the date 2024. We're just getting started in 2025. In a nutshell, what's BDO's big plans, or how's it moving its mission forward in 2025?
Sure. I mean, obviously, Hyperproof relationship's going to be the shining star of our plans in 2025. But from a new services standpoint, you would expect us to have a full portfolio of ISO and CSA certification products in our portfolio, and I'm extremely excited to announce that recently we're able to add, and frankly, we're probably one of the first few firms to do so, the ability to deliver the new ISO 42001 certification on AI, which everybody's excited about.
Awesome.
That recently happened like yesterday.
Wow.
So that's an exciting service to add to the portfolio. The next new service that we're really leaning into is to really get into the FedRAMP, StateRAMP market. Obviously, there's a lot of demand out there for that service. From a global services standpoint, as we've seen some of our clients' global needs expand, so too do our service offerings there. And so whether it's from ENS in Spain, or ISMAP in Japan, or CCC Plus in Saudi Arabia, we're just continually looking for ways to expand our footprint. So when we have a global client that has expanded needs around the world, we can be a seamless provider there. For those that are getting a SOC 1, you probably know that the new SOC 1 guide is set to release this year. So we'll be rolling out a lot of training and thought leadership to help our customers through that transition. And then the last, one I'll mention is really, BDO as a firm internally and through Hyperproof are continuing to invest in technology to increase the use of automations and emerging technology in our audit. That's the way the audit of the future is going, whether it's IT compliance audits or frankly financial audits. That's the way the world's going. So, we're doing our part to invest in that as well. So yeah, like you mentioned, Craig, right back at you. What exciting developments does Hyperproof have planned for 2025?
I'll limit myself to three here on this question. I would say new markets. So we announced that we've kind of moved into Europe with a landed team and Hyperproof working out of a data center in Europe. We have our first customers on there. So we plan to continue with a larger presence there, including going to more events and onboarding more customers there. And also, refining our content libraries to match to the different frameworks, as you mentioned, like ENS, for instance, is already in Hyperproof. We had DORA in Hyperproof for a couple months before it went live, et cetera, et cetera. So different markets would be one. Different verticals would be another one. We have customers across a really wide range of verticals. Many tech companies like us start out by selling to other tech companies. We did that, and now we're like kind of moving into other interesting verticals for us. The biggest ones would be manufacturing, healthcare, financial services, and government. And so I really echo a lot of what you were saying on government. We have CMMC and FedRAMP in the product. And one of the things which I won't announce now is that we ourselves are going to get compliant with some additional frameworks that'll really kind of help us drive trust within our customers and our partners as well. So new verticals as well, and those will come with new frameworks and new workflows, right? And a manufacturing company has different concerns, right, than a B2B SaaS company when they're getting compliant. So a lot of room for innovation there. And then the last one I'll highlight here is just new modules, right? There's so much work to be done to make compliance efficient. Some of these things we've talked about, we're enhancing our risk module so that we can democratize this view of risk across an organization, take it out of the star chamber, and kind of let everybody have a voice in it. We're adding a policy module. It's in early access right now. I'm not announcing a date for it, but it's coming pretty soon as well. And a number of other modules that are going to allow us to go deeper and deeper and allow us to customize our product to really map to your experience or to your infrastructure and kind of your goals. So it's going to be a really exciting year for Hyperproof. People are really thrilled to get going. We have our all-employee event, which we call Unite, coming up next week in San Diego, and I'm looking forward to meeting with the team to talk about this and other exciting initiatives we have.
Nice.
So thanks
All
for asking.
exciting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of commonality in what you guys are focused on, and we are. So, well, I know we're very tight on time here, so I think this brings us to the end of kind of the back and forth discussion with Rick and myself. Maybe we'll take one or two questions since we are running late. I see one here, which is, what are some direct examples of having your auditor working in the same GRC platform, making the audit easier? How can I make sure auditor only sees what I want them to see? So I'll tackle that first, Rick, and then feel free to add anything you like. Within Hyperproof, there's an audit module, and it acts differently than the other modules. The other modules, like your controls and assessments that you might do internally, are more broadly available to folks inside your organization. There's a full role-based access model with permissions, and in those cases, the auditor is not necessarily expected to be invited or to see those internal pieces. But in the audit module itself, there's a new role that pops up, which is the auditor role, and you can control who gets invited into that auditor role, and it goes beyond that. The auditor would be able to see the requests, of course, and then see the evidence that you upload, among other things. But even in the audit module, there is a place for you to have your scratch work that you just want to be done within your organization, so the auditor doesn't necessarily kind of see it. You want to perhaps pull it out of the oven, if you will, and present a little bit more, in a more controlled way. So those kinds of capabilities are right there in our audit module, full role-based access and different kinds of roles that can see different things depending upon what the scenario is. If you want to
Yeah,
add.
I think those are all great points. I think I'd add too is, the Hyperproof tool itself, when we're both in there, creates a common collaboration space. We're both talking the same language when it comes to planning and orchestrating the audit. We can sort of collaborate in that space to help you plan. How do you get from a once a year compliance mentality to more of a ComOps mentality? We can design, like, when does it make sense to start collecting this
Right.
evidence that you naturally should be doing throughout the year? So it's really just a great collaboration space.
I love that. That's great thoughts, Rick. Final question we'll take is, and this is a good one. A lot of GRC platforms and auditing firms out there. What made Hyperproof choose BDO and BDO choose Hyperproof? All right, I'll start real quick, and I think I touched on this before. For many years, Hyperproof has had a broad range of relationships with audit firms across the world. They've been pretty light touch relationships. Typically, it happens when we see like one of our customers maybe using that particular audit firm, and so we get to know one another, and a little bit of help here and there when we can. When we were looking at maturing our company and our partner ecosystem, at one level, we just wanted to work with the best. We wanted to work with the best, and we wanted to work with the firms that are the most trusted in in the world. And one more criteria: had the most technological vision or technology vision as to how we can apply some of the technology that we were building to really make this workload a lot easier. Okay, that's not always in any services role, audit or anything else. There's always a push and pull between, hey, the new tech is great, but does that mean I bill for less hours? That's true, not in audit, everywhere in any advisory type of role. And we found very like-minded partners in BDO. We have one or two others that we work with at a similar level. It's a very small number, and we can kind of share completely, and we're so aligned on the vision that the items that we decide to build in the product are ones that are broadly useful to that type of partner versus different type that might have other concerns. So it's just we believe where we have a great company and product, and we want to work with the best, and BDO fills that for us. Anything, Rick, from your side?
Yeah, I'll add my spin on it. I mean, you're right. There is a lot of GRC platforms out there, and they can have a lot of similarities. I think some of the key differentiators for us that really tipped the scales in a major way was the 120 plus compliance frameworks and growing in the tool, native, ready to go at a push of a button. That's a game changer, especially for an organization like us that needs to react quickly to either our client needs this now to we think we need this, help us get ready for it. So that was a key differentiator that we didn't see in other platforms. The other was the desire and the alignment with our future strategy in terms of how do you bring automation to the table without discounting the fact that you still need the human involvement in both the client side and the auditor side. There's a
Yeah.
lot of pitches out there that sort of just say, hey, plug this in, your audit's automated, and you're fine. And that's just a wrong message to send to the market. Craig and team were aligned on that mentality from day one. And so I think that was key for us because, going the other direction just sort of results in a non-quality audit. And that's not how we're built. So.
Well, thanks very much for that, Rick. So I think this brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thanks everybody for attending and staying for an extra couple minutes. And thank you, Rick, for joining and lending all of your insight to our joint customers. I hope you get a chance to do it again. So thanks everybody. A lot more resources here, hyperproof.io and bdo.com. And we look forward to engaging you if you can use some of our joint services together. So thanks everybody again for your attendance today.
Yep, take care. Thanks.